David Mahler is a master at restoring Texas landscapes, and what a beautiful setting he has created there for that homeowner. Restoring landscapes, bringing back the natives, cutting back the invasives, that's an important thing for us to be considering. And right now we're going to be talking about substitutes for so many of those invasive plants that come from other places that are really kind of de-Texifying our native landscapes. And I'm joined by Jared Pyka, who is with Native Texas Nursery. It's a wholesale operation here in Central Texas that supplies natives to the local nursery trade. Welcome back to the show, Jared.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, this is a great topic, and I know that you kind of, some of those invasives really get under your skin. They kind of bug you. Why do people care about invasives?
Well, it took me a while to completely understand it, but once I bought a house that was overgrown with ligustrums, I began to understand the frustrations and how they create a monoculture of an overstory, and they just choke out every other plant at ground level. When you cut one down, all of the seeds from that plant germinate and immediately grow faster than the surrounding native vegetation.
Right, right. So they self-propagate, and they take over, and as I said, de-Texify the landscape in a very real way. The rich diversity of plants that were here are being supplanted by, in some cases, just a handful of these invader species, from a lot of them from Asia.
That's right.
You know, ligustrum and privet.
That's the one that particularly gets on my nerves because I see it every day. But there's a few others.
China berry, nandina, you name it. They're all out there.
A few vines, Japanese honeysuckle.
Oh, yeah. There's these things, we all, and the pity is that I think unknowing homeowners are still introducing them into our landscapes without knowing that there are a lot of great natives alternatives.
That's right, that's right. And I think through more education, where we're giving people substitutions and new ideas, and even bringing back some classic plants that we've forgotten about that work really well.
Well, most people buy plants to fill a specific need. Let's face it, a lot of homeowners, and they might be excited about this variety or that variety, this bloom or that piece of fruit or whatever it is the plant delivers. But really, what drives most sales is that, I need a plant to screen something. I need a plant up against my house.
That's right. Blooms, deer resistant, all the above.
Right. So what we're going to be talking about are some certain situations that people have and some native substitutes for that. Now, we're going to start by talking about a particular plant that is well known, and this is a particularly gorgeous specimen of it. This is Cenizo, which is the Texas sage. Everybody knows it blooms purple following the rains. In terms of using this as a substitute in the landscape for other plants, how would you use this?
Well, it's a good substitute for some of the exotic invasives we talked about, like ligustrum, because this particular cultivar gets about 5 or 6 feet tall. So it prevents a lot of maintenance also, because it tops out right where you need it.
You're right.
It's evergreen. It does bloom sporadically throughout the year.
Right. So it provides color.
Deer don't eat it.
Deer don't eat it, and it's super hardy.
Absolutely.
In terms of drought tolerant, this is about as drought tolerant as it gets. I would say that it's wise to water them the first year. Yeah,
get them established, get a good root system going, and then you can treat them just like they were in Junction, Texas out there.
Right. I mean, it's a very good alternative to a lot of plants out there that require a lot more care and are a lot more invasive. Now, this is something that you could use up against a house or out in the yard as a screen between yards. Right next to it, we have a silver germander, and this is a plant that you're recommending as a foundation plant.
That's right. This would take the place of some of the Leucophyllum, maybe, for example.
Right.
Which isn't really a bad plant, but this is something that's a little different. The gray foliage is really nice against certain building materials.
Yeah.
Very drought tolerant. Deer, again, don't mess with this one.
Yeah.
And it does get little purple flowers on it throughout the summer.
And this is not a Texas native, but it's not invasive at all.
That's correct. At the nursery, we do grow some adapted species that are not native to Texas, but we're very careful to research and make sure that they will not come up in the creeks and rivers around parks and take over.
Yeah, and it's a shame if you go to any of the green belts in town, typically what you're seeing are things that have kind of taken over. We have a couple of other small foundation plants here, and this one is one that I know Barbados cherry is the name, and you know it's hard for people to appreciate how beautiful these little blooms are unless they're up close. But it's a really special plant. The blooms are gorgeous, and again, it makes a nice little shrub.
It does, and this one can be trimmed, almost hedged. It responds well to that. And this was a really good time of year to bring it. It's in bloom here. It'll be followed by little red cherries.
Right. So that hence the name Barbados cherry. And, you know, again, a tough xeric plant. And I think the more you shape some of these, the fuller they're going to be. So
That's right.
A little bit of tip pruning occasionally.
Promote some branching and make them a little more dense.
Right. But this is a tough plant that I also like to use in containers too, because get it up on a little podium so people can see that bloom. You know.
That's right. It has really interesting bark. Once it grows a little bit more, the bark begins to take shape. And
yeah. Terrific little plant. So that's one we can recommend to people, Barbados cherry, and a kind of unusual one. You don't see it in the nursery trade that much.
No, it's becoming available more and more, though.
Yeah. And here's another one that's a little bit on the unusual side, but I tell you, this is one I see everywhere I go in Central Texas in the woods. You know, this is silk tassel, and how would you use this in the landscape?
Well, there's two uses for this. It does take well to also tip pruning. You can make it become more dense, almost like a shrub.
Yeah.
And people are starting to use this for almost foundation plantings, where you can tolerate something a little taller.
Right.
You may not want to put it in front of a low window, but...
Right. At the corner of a house or something like that.
Exactly. That'd be great. This one doesn't really have much of a bloom, but the fruit is pretty. It has nice seed heads.
Right.
It is evergreen.
And the foliage is, I think, very attractive. It's glossy and has often kind of a lot of fluorescence on it.
It does. It does. It almost is a little bit like a honeysuckle, the leaf, but it's a very interesting plant that's right under our noses all the time. But
yeah.
People are starting to propagate it now in the nursery trade.
You say right under our noses, but we don't see it. And our next plant is a perfect illustration of that. This is one called elbow plant, and you tell me it's ubiquitous, and yet. And I like to think I know a lot about native plants in Texas. This is one I really don't know anything about, but you say it's everywhere.
It is. It is. On pretty much any Texas highway west of 35, when you're cruising down looking at the live oak trees, you'll see a mix of Texas persimmon and elbow bush, just a general green filler underneath those trees.
Right.
It is inconspicuous. You almost are blind to it because you don't notice it.
Right.
But it's part of just that green backdrop that we have that's so pretty on our Texas highways.
Yeah, and here we're going to start talking about layering plants in, because one of the big objects or reasons people plant a lot of things is they want screening. But often what they do is they go to the store and they buy 16 photinia, or whatever,
That's right.
And instead, they could have a rich assortment of natives that they kind of weave together and layer the plants in with one another. And this is a perfect plant for that.
That's right. And a lot of our city and government agencies are starting to use that method. TxDOT, for example, is starting to do that along our highways, where they'll do a mass planting of a lot of different native species. And let them just intermingle and make their own way. Yeah. And it looks very natural. And even though they're deciduous, because of the layering effect, it does create a really nice screen.
Yeah, and some of them are evergreen, like the next plant that we're going to be talking about, which is evergreen sumac, which has a lot of different uses.
That's right. That can almost be a tree. It takes well to pruning. You can make it a dense shrub. It's a really nice evergreen part of that layered mix.
Right. And it takes on a bronze color in the wintertime with the foliage.
It holds its leaves similar to a live oak tree, where it's not a true evergreen, but it does hold the leaves throughout the fall and winter. In the spring, the new leaves will push the old ones out, and it'll come out a nice, pretty green again.
Yeah, I really like the evergreen sumac, and it can kind of sprawl around, but I think the more sun it gets, the more compact.
That's exactly right.
Right. And next to it is a plant that I think is really underutilized in Central Texas. This is the roughleaf dogwood. And I'd like to recommend this to anybody who has creekside property where they really want to, they have erosion problems or something like that. But it is also a great screening device.
That's right. Along a creek or where it has enough moisture, it will sucker and become more thick and almost form more of a thicket if you want it to.
Yeah.
Really, really great for erosion mixed with inland sea oats or something. In a landscape, where you can choose how much to irrigate it, you can control its growth habits a little bit more.
Yeah, it's I think a beautiful plant. Often has beautiful fall color, interesting berries, and kind of an interesting bloom panicle on it as well.
That's right, and it's another one that just hides in the woods and we don't really notice it, but it's there when you're on a hiking trail.
Right, right. Well, lots of great alternatives here, Jared. Thank you so much again for coming back to Central Texas Gardener. We hope that people will look to some of these alternatives and stick with what we have here in Texas already and not go to some of the foreign invaders.
That's right, that's right. So just look up more information. There'll be more information on the way.
All right, thanks. And coming up next is our friend Daphne.